She took a breath. Well, do you want to face them? I've certainly got some things I'd like to say, she added threateningly. I had to admit I didn't really feel up to it. She must have been able to see it in my face. Side door, she said definitively. So much for my comeback. February dawned both gray and sunny, which made me feel uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was entering a month I couldn't trust, and I felt particularly vulnerable after having been burned so badly by January, when I'd fought my way out of my dark haze, dusted myself off, and dared to think the worst was over, only to have been viciously snapped back into the depths. Would February be as cruel? My only solace was that it had slightly fewer days to torture me. Though I distracted myself with work, the latest political news only thrust me further into my bad mood. Bremen had won the Iowa caucuses as expected and hadn't used the occasion to embrace a newfound humility. This is a victory for all of America, he'd shouted from a stage in Des Moines. America's champion is on a roll. I was pretty sure America's champion wasn't generally a self-bestowed title. Had Aaron been responsible for that phrase? It was shameless, so there was a good chance he had. And had he tried it out on Darlene the way he tested lines on me? Ugh. The following week, Y had stunned everyone by winning the New Hampshire primary, but Bremen had quickly brushed off the loss by explaining that his campaign wasn't meant to appeal to a, quote, small, homogenous group of folks who garnered too much influence over the system due to outdated rules, end quote. I was still somewhat of a novice in following presidential campaigns, but even I was pretty sure that bad-mouthing an entire state was not a smart idea. But, annoyingly, it didn't seem to hurt him. The third of the month brought a spate of primaries in which Bremen won the majority. There were at least 10 more primaries in February and then 13 in a single day on March 2nd. Most of the people in the know asserted that the nominee would emerge on that day, less than a month away, and most of them agreed that the nominee would be Bremen. I considered this extremely depressing news. Short of a miracle, it seemed as though Bremen was soon to be anointed. On the other side, Brancy had swept the primary contest thus far, but neither Fran nor Pyle seemed ready to concede defeat. Both hinged their comebacks on their performances in the South, where Pyle was allegedly engaged in a full-fledged underground smear campaign against Brancy. If successful, Pyle's dirty tactics could provide him with an upset. As I skimmed through the news site on a rainy morning, I tried not to focus on the dismal prospect of living in a country led by President Bremen, or, heaven forbid, another Pyle. I felt physically nauseous at the thought. I reached for the Tums and watched Mona pass by my desk reading a folder. She seemed more dressed up than normal. I studied her closely. Mona, I said curiously, what's that on your finger? Oh, this. She blushed, reluctantly indicating a brand new engagement ring. Yeah, Mark proposed, she said sheepishly. They'd only been dating 2 months. Were engagements allowed at that point? Congratulations, I managed to say, through my surprise. At least Mona could now be positive that Mark didn't harbor any residual crush on me. He'd proposed to her while I'd been lonely and available, just down the hall. I doubted she'd need further proof of his devotion. Yeah, we moved kind of fast, she laughed, though when you say I love you on the first date, it sort of speeds everything up. There were couples that actually did such things without disastrous repercussions. This was fascinating. I felt like Jane Goodall studying a species so similar to myself, and at the same time, so undeniably foreign. Wow, was all I could say. I'd heard Jane Goodall before on television. I knew that she was infinitely more eloquent. Have you all set a date yet? I asked. According to their timeline, it should be the next 6 weeks or so. We were thinking about doing it in August during the recess, she replied. That way we won't have to miss too much work or anything. In my opinion, a wedding and honeymoon were perfect excuses to miss work. Whenever I'd fantasized about my betrothal to Steve Martin, I'd always spent a bit of time thinking about where we'd go right afterwards and how much work I could get away with skipping. Work was certainly important to me, but building a solid foundation for the rest of Steve's and my life together seemed worthy of a substantial time investment. After all, our love was what would carry us through the tough times. And the wedding will probably be pretty small, Mona added. Was that some sort of heads up that I shouldn't expect an invitation? Small is nice, I said carefully. I couldn't believe I wasn't going to be invited to their wedding. But fine. Who needed to go to Chicago in August anyway? I could get heat stroke somewhere else just as easily. I smiled deceptively at Mona and made a show of getting back to my work. When I wasn't working, I stayed home. The restaurant opening had been horrible enough to scare me away from any sort of social scene for a while. Liza reluctantly accepted my imposed isolation. She was spending a lot of her time with Scooter, who had apparently made tremendous strides with the help of therapy. He was calling far fewer penalties during sex, and almost all of them were minor. Left to our own devices, Dr. Cincinnati and I started listening to Blind Blake almost every night before falling asleep. I found myself wishing I owned some kind of instrument. I was living the blues. Why not try and play them? If embracing my pain could reveal some previously unknown and extremely hip talent, then maybe the suffering was worth it. Maybe. On an impulse, I picked up a shiny but used harmonica at a pawn shop. After disinfecting it for 3 days to be sure it was free of germs as chemically possible, I downloaded some how-to instructions from the internet, poured myself a glass of wine, and set about my work. I was terrible. I tried to convince myself that anyone would sound as bad when they first started, but I saw right through me. I decided to accept the unfortunate fact that it took more than being depressed to make it as a blues musician and explore some other talents. It turned out I was quite proficient at picking up Chinese takeout. It was on my way back from yet another successful mission that I spotted Charlie and Veronica ahead of me on the sidewalk. They were stopped outside a store window, and Veronica was pointing out something in the display. Charlie was looking attentively. He had his arms wrapped around her, and she was holding a rose he must have given her. It all made for a typically romantic scene. I froze. Once they moved along, I made my way to the window Veronica had been pointing to. It was a stationery store with a window display featuring several different kinds of wedding invitations. Fear gripped my heart. Goodness, were Veronica and Charlie getting married? That was a terrible idea. My reaction surprised me. Why did I care whether they got married or not anyway? It wasn't any of my business. I really didn't know either of them, I told myself as I tried to unfurrow my brow. But it was just all wrong. Veronica was awful, and though I didn't know Charlie well, I'd really enjoyed talking to him at the restaurant opening, at least until we'd spotted Aaron and Darlene, and then Charlie had condescendingly diagnosed me as confused. Come to think of it, maybe he was arrogant and snide after all. I couldn't be sure. Back at my apartment, I ate my mushu chicken and mused about relationships. At the moment, it seemed that everyone besides me was in one. And so many of them weren't the wrong ones. In my opinion, Veronica wasn't right for Charlie, Scooter wasn't right for Liza, and Brayman wasn't right for America, and I didn't even want to get started on Aaron and Darlene. The fact that all these relationships seemed to be thriving despite their essential wrongness left me feeling helpless and outnumbered. But I comforted myself with the idea that at least things couldn't get any worse. The next day they did. During an interview that I watched from The Office in what must have been a calculated effort to appear more centrist, Brayman came out strongly against RG's bill for increased funding to NIH, the bill that I had drafted, the bill that had been steadily gaining support and was being touted as likely to become law. I watched in appalled amazement as he trashed the pending legislation. Most of the pundits were saying that Brayman had the nomination sealed up and needed to start focusing on the general election by appealing to a wider base and combating the image many had of him as a political waffler beholden to his party's special interests. Brayman had apparently taken this advice to heart. I could tell from his expression that he thought he was distinguishing himself in a bold and startling way. At some point, those in my party need to stop spending Americans' hard-earned dollars like they don't have anyone to account to, Brayman thundered. I'd like to find a cure for these terrible diseases as much as the next person, but we need to be smart and disciplined in our approach. We can't keep taxing and spending without a proven strategy. The interviewer seemed as surprised as I was. Yet, Senator Brayman, you co-sponsored a new prescription drug benefit package with Senator Gary that's going to cost the taxpayers some money. Do you now regret your participation in that measure? The CNN reporter asked. Of course not, Brayman scoffed. There's an enormous difference between Senator Gary's NIH bill, which is nothing but a frivolous budgetary add-on, and my drug benefit package, which is going to provide much-needed relief to millions of Americans. Wasn't it Senator Gary who initially authored the drug benefit package? The reporter asked. You're damn right it was, I shouted at the TV screen. Neither Brayman nor the reporter seemed to hear me. Brayman waved his hand dismissively as if batting the question aside. Senator Gary floated a half-baked idea that he needed a lot of help with, he answered. To say that he came up with the package is like saying Nestle came up with the chocolate chip cookie. That recipe's been around for a long time. I'm the one that really got things cooking. Mark looked as though he'd been expecting me when I arrived at his desk. I know, I saw it, he said before I could launch into my tirade. It was the most horrifying, extended baking metaphor I've ever heard, I said through gritted teeth. Has someone let RG know? He saw it too, Mark answered. What did he say about it? I asked curiously. He's pissed off, Mark answered. Good, but he'd been pissed off in the past and opted not to retaliate. Though I usually love the fact that RG devoted himself to a bigger picture view of the world and strove to stay above the fray, I longed for revenge. I was sick of taking the high road and getting beaten at every pass. Mark's phone started ringing. And here they come, he sighed with an air of resolve as he picked up his phone. Mark Herbert, he said into the receiver. That sounded so professional. I made a note to start answering my own phone in a similar fashion. Mona joined me as Mark fielded press calls. Unbelievable, she declared, shaking her head. I just saw the replay of it on CNN. The Drudge Report already has a headline about Braman dissing RG. I can't fathom why he would do such a thing, I replied. Which was true. I knew Braman was a jackass, but this sort of behavior seemed downright irrational. There were plenty of frivolous bills on the Hill to come out against. Why pick a meaningful one that was actually going to help people? Did he have something against RG in particular? These new on-the-record comments on top of the months of quote-unquote unnamed source criticism suggested that he did, but I'd always heard that he was an equal opportunity asshole. He's a jerk to everyone, Mona agreed, but he's been particularly threatened by RG ever since they got elected to Congress the same year. RG hasn't been as openly ambitious, but he's been better respected by everyone who works with them, and that really bugs Braman. Interesting. I'd assume that Braman simply looked down on RG out of arrogance. It hadn't occurred to me that his hostility could have been born of jealousy. I pondered this as I made my way back to my desk, where Janet immediately buzzed me. "He'd like to see you," she said crisply into my ear. "Now?" I asked incredulously. "No." I raced to RG's office. He was sitting quietly at his desk in a thoughtful pose when I walked in. "Hello, Samantha," he said. "Hello, sir," I replied. He paused for a moment before settling his features into a serious expression. A veneer of resolve swept from his forehead down to his chin. I'd seen this expression before. RG had made a significant decision. "You saw Braman?" he asked. I nodded. It was unbelievable, sir. He didn't even... RG held his hand up. I fell silent, feeling a bit chastised. My face must have fallen a bit because RG's features softened in response. "I know," he answered more kindly. "I've just received a call from James Satchel," he continued. Satchel was the senator from California and the head of RG's healthcare committee, the one he'd just convinced to hear testimony on the need for increased funding for Parkinson's, Huntington's, and Alzheimer's. James thinks that the committee schedule is too full at the moment to be able to devote enough time as needed to the hearings. He's pulling the plug on them for the time being," he finished. I gasped. What? We'd been slated to begin the hearings that week. The bill had already been gathering tons of buzz, and pledges of support. "Clearly, Satchel feels pressure to be supportive of Braman," RG continued. Satchel had endorsed Braman early on and become the West Coast co-chair of his campaign. I had read that the two of them had belonged to the same meeting club at Princeton, but still he was the chairman of a key committee, and he told RG how important he thought the legislation was. Apparently just not as important as collecting political chits in an election year. "But," I protested. "There's no but, Sammy. The bill is dead," RG said calmly. "The reality is that Braman is completely in bed with the insurance industry. The particular companies he's tied to have never been all that eager for more research into neurodegenerative diseases unless there's a clear home run payoff. They'd rather have the money go elsewhere. They wanted our bill dead, and Braman killed it for them. It's a corrupt situation, end of story." There wasn't bitterness in his voice so much as a sense of finality. I didn't know how to respond. "But," I stammered, "like I said, there is no but," RG interrupted. "That's simply the way it is. However, there is an and. Braman's dirty business destroyed our bill, and I've had enough of him." That was the ray of hope I'd been searching for. I felt like my clothes might have even brightened in response. I just wanted to let you know, since you've done a lot of great work on this, we're not giving up on it, we're just delayed, he said. I can almost hear the rallying music swelling all around us. Yes, sir, I answered. I could tell that I was about to be dismissed. What are you going to do about Bremen, sir? I heard myself ask. I'll be endorsing Max Y at an event in Cleveland in the next week. You should keep that to yourself for the moment, please. It was a succinct, powerful, invigorating response. That was brilliant. I knew that most people considered Bremen a shoo-in, but I believed in RG's instincts. Plus, the Ohio primary was coming up on March 2nd, along with contests in a slew of other states. If anyone could deliver Ohio for someone, RG could. He'd been heavily lobbied for his endorsement by the other campaigns for quite some time now. So, with a little luck, RG could be joining a winning bandwagon and exacting sweet revenge in the process. That's great news, sir, I responded. I've liked Y from the beginning. I was staying away from the contest out of respect for my colleagues involved in the process, but I don't feel that John Bremen deserves my respect anymore. I just need to explain myself to Conrad and Rexford and then get on with it. Can I help with anything, sir? I asked. Yes, I'd like to have a healthcare aspect to the endorsement event. See what you can cook up. Gladly. I returned to my desk, feeling as though a weight had been lifted. It was true that things hadn't been going well in my personal life, but who cared? I'd rather have no relationship than be stuck in a wrong one, and my professional life was providing plenty of excitement. I was fighting a good fight and doing my part to help change things for the better. Apparently, I just needed to choose my battles. I doubted I could break up Charlie and Veronica, or Liza and Scooter. And though I thought I'd broken up Aaron and Darlene, it clearly hadn't stuck. Maybe I'd have more success helping to break up Bremen and America. It was a long shot, I knew, but I felt it was worth it. Bremen and his team didn't deserve to be front-running away with the nomination, so I was ready and willing to trip them up however we could. The stakes were high, but the grayness was receding and my vision was clear. In the reflection of my computer screen, I saw the beginnings of a smile spread across my face.